Good morning. Thank you, Hugh. Thank all of you for coming this morning. Like you said, braving the elements and getting an opportunity to speak to Pete and I. A special thanks to our friends at Thomas and Hafer as well. We have about probably less than 50 minutes, so we're going to try to go through as much information as we possibly can. This session is not really designed to be a one-on-one on investigations or forensics, but rather start to talk about some of the recent technological developments and how they've impacted human behavior. And if you take a good, strong look at that, perhaps maybe it'll have an impact on your next case that you're investigating, or it's not a legal matter when you're looking at it. Try to think of this from a different kind of perspective. You know, we think about technology over the years and how it's been responsible for creating a tremendous amount of resources. We literally have all the information we could ever possibly want at our fingertips. Okay? There's more technology in this phone right now than was in the first space shuttle that went to the moon. Okay? We've been so accustomed to having this information accessible to us that it's really started to impact our daily lives just about in every capacity. I mean, it's changed the way we communicate with each other. It changes the way that, we share information, how we read information, how we get our news, how we date, and how we even parent to a certain degree. I mean, just to talk to my 8-year-old daughter, if I can't answer her question, the first thing she says to me is, "Dad, just Google it." Okay? So technology has changed every aspect of our life, and certainly investigations is no exception. So when we look at technological advancements that are out there, like social media, and we talk about the ability to change our human behavior, what we're doing. I mean, now there are social programs, I don't know if you've seen them or not, it's called digital detox, that we're so accustomed to having access to our electronics.
Sorry.
You okay, Tony?
Yeah, I'm going to turn up the volume. I'll get somebody up here. Go ahead.
We're so accustomed, can you hear me now? Yeah. We're so accustomed to having our electronics at our disposal, they've created social programs to be able to deal when we don't have access to our electronic devices, which we referenced as digital detox. So now that we have these developments and we have the ability to process information from an investigative perspective, it's a tremendous amount of resources for us. Let's see here. It's our bios, by the way. There's information up front about both of our companies. If you would like any additional information, feel free to learn a little bit more about us. Okay. Oh, got ahead there. I've wanted to find the most basic and simple definition of an investigation. The process of trying to find out the details, facts, or something in order to learn what or who caused it. Okay. Probably the most generic definition I could possibly get, but I added on there the how and the why. And the how and the why from a corporate perspective or from a civil perspective is just as important and many times as the who. Okay? And in order to discover the how and why typically involves an understanding human behavior. Okay? So the technological developments like social media, okay, and our human behaviors like, every night, this phone sleeps next to me more often than my wife. She loves when I say that, but it's true. So if you're able to think from that perspective, you can certainly then glean a lot of information, and allows you the ability to look into the window of a person's mind to understand their thoughts, their perceptions, and their actions. So we're in this pivotal point when it comes to investigation where you have two basic primary thoughts. Okay, you have the Sherlock Holmes, the old-fashioned gumshoe, and you have more of the contemporary digital investigations. And this is where these two worlds collide. So there's three important points that I kind of wanted just to point out real fast. One is awareness of what technology is out there. Okay? One of the biggest hurdles investigators have is not knowing what information is out there, what electronic devices are collecting information on you, to be able to utilize that in their investigation. I would reference my Garmin on the way here, my GPS. It's collecting data on me. If you pulled my Garmin right now, you could see over the last year where I've gone, where I've traveled, how long I was there, what course I took, how fast I was driving. Okay, the pamphlets you have in front of you, the booklets, the copy machine, okay, that made that's probably got a hard drive, probably has all the copies that have been made over the last year. So, if you really want to be a astute and effective investigator, you have to be able to reach out to these types of technology to pull information that was otherwise not necessarily available to you. Okay. Enhancement of investigations. So if you are an old-fashioned kind of gumshoe kind of guy, digital technology is going to enhance your investigation by allowing you to, like I said, peek into someone's mind and perception, to get an idea of knowing what their thoughts are, what their actions are, and is a tremendous resource. And lastly, I think it's important, this is where Pete and I often disagree on a few things. He's a technology guy. I'm probably more of the old school investigator type, okay? Technology can never replace the human element, can never replace a very good, skilled investigator. Technology is nothing more than a tool, but certainly is critically important, will not replace intuition, will not replace a person's ability to communicate with someone, be able to connect with them, understand nonverbal communication and behavior analysis. We look at the next generation that's coming up. It's kind of an art that they've lost. Try to have a discussion with my teenage daughter. She's sitting down at her phone and she's texting, okay? So you're seeing a generation of folks that are losing that ability to be able to connect with folks one-on-one. Wanted to talk quickly about surveillance. Okay, surveillance is probably because it's the type of investigation you would probably associate with some type of claims investigation. Okay? As you can imagine, over the last 20 years, surveillance has tremendously been impacted. 20 years ago, if you were given a case, you may or may not have had a photo of someone. You may or not have an old-fashioned map you had to fold out. You probably had very little information to go off of. But today, that has completely changed. If there is an effective pre-surveillance investigation done, you know what the person looks like, you know what their activities are, where they go, what they do. You have a map of their location so that you can effectively and efficiently get out there and you can schedule your assignments in such a way that you can be as efficient and get the results that you need. In addition to, you have access to communication. 20 years ago, you're lucky if you had a flip phone. Now, you're empowered with your own personal computer. You're having live stream communication back and forth so that you can respond much more from a nimble perspective. Proliferation of video cameras. I don't think that anyone, the sense of expectation of privacy has changed over the years. If you go to, say, a Walmart, there's a presumption that you're going to be videotaped in the parking lot. You're going to be videotaped in the store. And everyone around you is powered with some type of camera. And most claimants, they're aware of that, particularly if they've been coached or educated by their counsel. So typically, you really need an astute investigator who understands that and knows how to be able to document someone's activity when they know that they are being watched or potentially watched, and when they also know that they may not be. There's a big contrast in their actions and their capabilities. Surveillance. If you really want to understand human behavior, nothing is more telling than putting eyes on somebody. Okay? A picture's worth 1,000 words, well, so is surveillance. You really want to know someone's behavior, what their actions are. Nothing is better looking at them to see what their expressions on their faces are, where they're going, and what they're doing. Between surveillance and pulling someone's trash, you can know more about someone than you ever wanted to know. So the next time you take your trash out to the curb, think about that. It can tell you how many bottles of wine that you drink a week, any prescription medications you have because you're throwing empty bottles away. If you really want to know somebody, you initiate surveillance on them, see where they're going, what they're doing, but also pull someone's trash. It's very telling. Intelligence gathering, surveillance will provide you information that otherwise you may not have known, where they're going, who they associate, and what their activities are. I've put in here a couple things worth mentioning to you, particularly with lawyers in the room, legal considerations. Before you decide to hire an investigator, or quite frankly, any other vendor, you really need to know who you're dealing with, set goals, set expectations. The biggest problem that I see in the industry is that you have overzealous investigators trying to impress either the insurance carrier or the law firm that hired them. And in doing so, they do have some questionable activities. Maybe they trespass, maybe they're engaging in conversations with some folks that are represented. So making sure that you feel comfortable with who you're putting out there because they are your agent, they represent you, and you set clear guidelines. And lastly, I have technology versus the technician. Okay? All the time, someone's coming out with some new fad, some new gadget or gizmo. You know, sometimes folks will say we have these remote cameras that they put on utility poles. Well, I wouldn't want to be the lawyer that is utilizing that as evidence in the case and having the plaintiff counsel explain that those cameras were not legally put on those utility poles. Okay? Folks putting out cars with little bubble cameras on top of this. Those are all fads. Those are all gizmos. It may work on an occasion, but again, it goes back to the technician. It's the human element. It's the person out there who's versed and who's skilled, who knows human intelligence and can respond kind of accordingly. Okay? And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Pete to talk a little bit about social media.
Thank you, Bill, and good morning, everybody. Social media. I'm sure we've all been through several conversations, talks, scares, and all the things about social media and how this is the world we live in. It's not going away. It's not something that we should be afraid of, but we need to be cognizant of what's happening, what are people looking at. And when social media first came out, everybody's like, look what people's comments are online. Look at what they're saying. And really this has morphed into less of a look at what people's direct inputs are into social media, as much as what is social media tracking that people don't realize it's doing that investigators are starting to pull into. And that can become a wealth of information. So one of the first things I always like to ask is there anybody in here who does not have a Facebook account? Okay, I'm one, so we get 3 people. Are you on Facebook? Do you have a wife or kids or spouse? Are they on Facebook? You're on Facebook. I can tell you how many times I've walked down the street, see somebody I haven't seen in a long time. Hey, looked like you had a great dinner the other night. I'm like, what the? I'm like, my wife. You know, she's a Facebook user. So none of us are immune to social media and then all the other technology pieces that sort of drive along with it. And so really what you start thinking about with social media and the proliferation and what's happening with all this as one potential source of information, what is it that are points that we should be aware of that people are taking a look at? So I did a presentation recently that was based around jury selections and identifying profiles of people. And this isn't in the slides, but I thought it was pertinent and interesting enough to raise today. One of the things that marketers are out there doing with social media stuff is something that's called Facebook mining. Has anybody heard of this before? So the concept basically is, if you see somebody's profile on Facebook and they are liking things, right? So you can like things, give it the thumbs up on Facebook, that with 68 likes on average, if you find someone that has 68 likes, you're able to predict their skin color to a 95% accuracy, their sexual orientation to an 88% accuracy, their party affiliation to 85% accuracy. With 10 likes, a statistician looking at that is able to outdo what a coworker knows about the person who they've just examined. With 70, outdo what friends know. 150, able to outdo what parents know. And 300, able to outdo what partners know. Isn't that scary that like just us hitting likes on Facebook or profiling ourselves to such a degree that somebody's able to come in and say, I know more about you than your partner does. So this kind of information out there, and this isn't a comment. Who would ever think that that kind of interaction with social media are things that are allowing us to say this is this kind of person that's going to help us identify and establish what behaviors and patterns and habits and things like that they do. And so really like these types of things are becoming the areas that investigators are looking at that aren't, hey, I posted something on Facebook and that's some direct piece of evidence that, I'm just going to grab down. People are smart enough to realize to be cautious about those things usually today. So one of the things, I'll just give a few examples here because we have quite a bit of materials to get through. To give some examples of this, we were involved in a case that involved a Facebook site. And the plaintiff in this case was in a very bad car accident. It was a tractor trailer that hit a car. There was a fatality in the front. This particular plaintiff's in the back. So serious accident. The claim was a permanent cognitive brain defect, high value, a lot of insurance at stake, etc. So this is, as I'm sure a lot of you realize, this is a tough injury to you're going to have your experts on either side arguing the diagnosis and how critical this is and the rest of it. So the lawyers in this case do what I think they should. They looked at the Facebook account, they looked at the social media profiles to see what's out there. What are we dealing with? Is there anything we should be aware of? So there's really nothing there in the comments and things like that. It's a pretty clean Facebook account. Not a whole lot's been said. But the expert in this case, or the lawyer in this case, recognizes that this particular plaintiff is pretty a prolific user of Bejeweled. And has anybody ever played the game Bejeweled on Facebook? Okay. It's pretty addictive. You're matching colors up and you keep going until you get to these super levels. And if you keep telling your friends, hey, like Bejeweled or do this, you'll get more free lives. So they call them freemiums, right? That's how they get you to keep doing these things to ultimately get other people to use the tool or get to a point where you're like, yes, I'll pay $50 to get past this level that I can't get. So anyway, this person played so much of this Bejeweled, they became a grandmaster champion Bejeweled level player. Right? And at deposition, the lawyer says, yeah, I looked at your Facebook account, didn't see a whole lot there. She's like, oh, I see you love playing Bejeweled. I love playing Bejeweled. Now remember, this is on the record. This is sort of at the beginning of the thing. Gets this plaintiff to admit, yes, this is the account, this is the level that they got to, this is the point they got. And what that was the expert said, this is a test for cognitive functionality. You can't do these repetitive type of activities and get to this level and have the injury that's being claimed here. Now think about that. Think about the sort of side way of coming into a social media site that's such critical evidence to get inside somebody's brain to say, are they telling the truth or not about these tests? That became critical evidence in a case like that. Now the case settled before the point where this could have gotten put in front of a judge to see about the admissibility, but the expert witness was saying, I will modify my expert report to take this information and will testify that this is fair and accurate testing to use as part of my opinion. So again, one example of sort of the sideways that social media stuff is being used beyond what we traditionally think about with commentaries and other things like that. Another one is Twitter. So a lot of people don't realize that when you tweet something, most Twitter accounts, I think the default is set for this. I'm not a Twitter user, so I'm not 100% sure, but the default setting is that location-specific information about where you tweet from is turned on. So when you tweet, and most people are tweeting from their phone, it's stamping where that tweet was made from. So another case, we had a 19-year-old kid, he goes out, he gets drunk, he's driving home in a rural area, runs off the road, hits into some power equipment. He's fine, car's pretty banged up, but this piece of equipment's not very fine. And he gets out of the car and, being a 19-year-old kid, what's the first thing he does? Takes pictures of his car and tweets, hey, I was just in an accident. So he does that, and then he realizes and looks and says, oh, that looks like a pretty expensive thing I just hit into. Maybe I don't want to be here. So he drives home, gets into the parking lot of his house, sobers up. Next day calls the insurance company to say. So the police realize, hey, we got an accident, and so they start investigating this. And so they say to the kid, they say, well, what happened here? And he says, oh, I hit a deer or something. And clearly they don't buy his story. So they go onto his Twitter account. And they pull down and they say, well, this tweet has you GPS location in exactly the place where this accident happened. Oh, no, that must be wrong or whatever. So they subpoena or they get a search warrant for his phone. And when you take a picture on your phone, what happens? That also geotags the location where you were. So they had 2 separate points of data where he finally said, yeah, that was me, I did this, and the rest of it. So 2 indisputable or pretty strong pieces of information in one simple tweet saying, hey, I was in an accident, that put him at the scene of the location. So these things can become very important. And when we're thinking about social, we're thinking about investigations in general, and we're thinking about the cyber world that we live in. I mean, this is our primary interaction with what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. This is, I think, an interesting slide when you look at what an internet minute is. Look at how much activity is happening on any particular website at any point in time. You have, 52,760 photos shared through, I think that's Instagram, and 1,300 Uber rides are done, 150 emails sent, and on and on and on. I mean, think about all the data that's being created here. This is where people are living. This is how they're interacting in their daily lives. And so the sources of information that are going to be available to be captured online are growing exponentially every single day. And the challenge isn't going to become, is there good and useful information out there? It's going to be, what do you look for? Where do you go? What kind of information, what kind of user is this person? What types of things should we be looking for? By the time we're done here today, in this claim symposium, there will be 3 new applications built that are going to be the next great things. This is a moving target. But this ends up being a rich source of information that can say a lot about what's happening out there in the world. So if I were to ask the audience, does anybody have an idea of what you think is the single most piece of disruptive technology we've had in, say, the last 10 years? Anybody? Cell phones, exactly. And why is that? I would say it's because we live and die with our cell phones. Bill was sleeping with his cell phone to his poor wife's detriment there, but I think that is true. Like, you think about our technology world, right? And if surveillance and investigations are driven around, predicting and identifying and working with people's behaviors, think about how much a cell phone has changed our behavior, our smartphones. Like, who goes to sleep and typically the last thing you do is you look at your phone? Me. A lot of us, I'm sure. First thing you do when you wake up? Me. Think about just that behavioral change that little piece of technology has done in something that's very significant and regular part of your day. And why? Because this is the way we get news. This is the way we communicate. This is the way we check for weather. This is the way you can go on and on and on. If you want to think about how disruptive this may be, I often ask people and say, all right, well, think about it really hard. Which one of these would actually be the most disruptive for you in a day if you lost your cell phone, your car keys, or your wallet? It might be a toss-up, or maybe the phone. Like, I probably don't know my wife's cell phone number. Don't tell her that, but there's a lot of people I couldn't communicate with them because I don't know how to get in touch with them any other way. And, that's just the world that we live in, and this has become such a critical piece to sort of we're attached to. Yes, sir?
Is this something you've actually got to get the cell phone in your hands to find out, or can you get this data without even getting the cell phone?
A very good question. So it's a mixture of both. If you can get the cell phone, that obviously has a lot of important information. I'm going to show you some examples of some stuff you can get from the phone. But what's happening is more and more, the data, the cell phone is just a transmitter to put the data out into some public web source. Facebook is free, right? No, their currency is just your data. And all these apps, like you look at all these places that don't charge subscriptions, like how can Facebook have no revenue and be worth $20 billion or whatever it is? But it's because the data is so valuable. And so they're trading their currency in all these, sort of social media sites and apps and things like that people really are starting to become the primary ways that people are interacting with their phones are data mining sources. And once it gets up into the cloud, there's a good chance that you're going to start finding this stuff. And so more and more, it kind of goes to this point about expectations of privacy. We just don't have them anymore. And the younger the generation, it's just not there. I mean, there was a study done recently about how many people actually have the privacy settings turned on Facebook, And it started off that everybody had privacy turned on. Then you realize like a social media site doesn't work as well if it's not very social. So it's just turned off. And it's something like less than 10% of people now have privacy settings turned on in any way, shape, or form. And from a legal standpoint, that's basically the rule in capturing people's Facebook sites. So if they don't have a privacy setting turned on and you can access it as the general public, it's fair game. There is no expectation of privacy. So as this stuff is moving out of the phones and into the cyber world, it's becoming more and more accessible. You don't even have to get the phone. And the other piece is, communication and the way that we talk with each other is critical in any situation to figure out what people are saying, what's happening. And, if I were to ask you, what's the primary way that people under the age of 20 communicate today? What would be some of the answers? Text, Snapchat, WhatsApp. We're going to come up with 10 different ways. It's not email. It's not writing letters. The things that 5 years ago, we would have said, "Oh, you get people's emails." That's changed, and it's going to be different again in 2 years. And so we have to keep in mind, you always want to know what people are communicating, right? So we can't just say, "Well, our standard is we get emails." No, you got to chase the way people talk with each other, and the more nouveau it is, the more they feel like they're in their little cyber world. This becomes the critical piece where they're actually talking freely. It amazes me sometimes what people will put on text because they're not thinking that somehow this is accessible or controlled because it's my device to another device, and there's no company servers in between. So these things start to become very important in capturing it. And this has had some effects on, I think, our society as general. This is now the three biggest fears of a young generation, if you see any one of these three things. And this has sort of had a evolutionary or de-evolutionary effect on society in general, but it's our world, it's what we're living in. So this is reality. And again, I don't want to be a fearmonger up here saying, "Oh, look at all these things that are happening out there." It's just a recognition that if we're after data, and we're after important data, and we're after behaviors, and we're after understandings, we have to keep this in mind, that this is only going to increase more over time. So with the bit of time I have left, I want to talk about two specific things. Smartphones, because I think we agree that's a rich area for us to be considering, and some of the stuff you can get off of smartphones. And then talk about something called the Internet of Things, which is, from my perspective, probably the next area where we're going to see lots and lots of activity in data gathering for the areas that are called the Internet of Things. And as has happened, if you have questions, just raise your hand throughout this, and I'll make sure I answer them as they pop up. So smartphones. Some stats. 80% of all online adults have smartphones. I don't know who the other 20% are, but that may be a little scary. But 80% of all online adults have smartphones, and 75% of those smartphone users are accessing the internet from their mobile devices. Text messages, emails, social media, internet searching, etc., on and on. And it goes back to your question about how much of this stuff you have to get to the phone. It's moving away from that. The phones are becoming less the critical factor of what you would need to have the device to pull it off of versus what you can actually pull from the World Wide Web or cyberspace, just as a general way of gathering information. So what are some things, though, if you do have the phone, that you can get access to? So we do a lot of forensics work, and the smartphone has become a critical piece in almost every single case that we're involved with. It's not only just that you want to get the plaintiff's phone or the defendant's phone, but like your own client, you want to know. You want to know, hey, if you're telling me let's go look at this and make sure that we're verifying that what you're saying is accurate. Or if you're defending a case and you have to look at data points to determine different components of the case, you want to get their phone. That's certainly in their possession for them to give it up to you if that's the case. So what are some things that we typically look for in phones? So we're looking for artifact selectors. This just tells you generally what is somebody doing on a phone and how often are they doing it. Are they a heavy app user? Are they a big text messenger? Are they, out to websites? Are they using it as a phone? That's a novel idea and not as common, but what is it, how are they using this phone? Because that's going to drive you into looking at other areas to say, all right, well, we need to be aware that this is somebody who has some social media presence in these particular areas, take a look at, et cetera. So this can be an important first step in understanding what you look for. Certainly your text and messaging logs. You want to look at this and you want to see, all right, well, what's happening text-wise back and forth, because we all are sort of driving towards more texting because it's so immediate and it's so easy and it's quick, and then we have so much communications in there that people tend not to delete their texts. And you have these long strings of just replying to the last thing that's kind of back and forth because it doesn't eat up a whole lot of space or anything, so you just don't delete it. It's not like emails where you're like, I got 5,000 emails, I need to clean up my inbox. People just don't get rid of this stuff. So it tends to have a long historical perspective when you're looking at text messages. It makes it a little difficult sometimes because you don't have clean starts and stops as to where a conversation ends and begins. So again, if I text my wife, I'm just picking up where I last left off, and I might be starting a new conversation that has nothing to do with what we were talking about before. So you have to keep that in mind when you're looking at these. A call log. I've found, especially the younger the parties are involved in the case, that when it gets to a point that they're actually calling somebody, you should pay attention to that because they do it so infrequently. And if you have calls back and forth in a critical time period, you want to take a hard look at that and see what's happening, just because people don't pick up the phone and call each other anymore. So this becomes something that tends to be critical, just seeing, hey, who is it and when, and if it's a contact in their phone, it's going to list their name. It's going to show you the back and forth. Did they call? Did they receive a call? How often was this communication happening back and forth? And things like a timeline with geodata. Basically, you can go in a phone and just see, all right, let's say I'm targeting a 2 or 3 day window, everything that's happened on that phone in that time frame from when they woke up to when they went to bed. And geodata starts to become cached in here where you can start to see, like I said, some of these stampings of where the phone was at any point in time. So how many people in here have iPhones? Okay, pull your iPhone out because I'm going to freak you out. All right, so if you have your iPhone, I want you to follow these settings to show you something. So if you go into the settings on your iPhone, which is a little gear icon, click on that, and then you'll see there's a button in there that says privacy. Click on privacy. And after you hit privacy, you'll see at the top it's location services. And generally the default's on, and if you ever use maps or find something nearby, any of those types of things, it has to be on. So if that's on, click that. And then at the bottom of the next screen, you'll see something that says System Services. Click on that. Now, just keep in mind how deep we're going into the settings on the phone. Under System Services now, we are looking for, yes, at the bottom, something called Frequent Locations. The default is on. How many people have that on? Okay, click on that.
Wow.
Yeah. For the people who don't have a phone in front of you, what they're seeing is that your phone regularly takes timestamps of locations of where that phone was. I still haven't been able to figure out exactly how often that happens, but it happens pretty good. And so like if you have something like you're heading to your office or home, you click on any one of those locations and it will not only tell you that you were there, but it'll tell you the time frames you were there and have a little map of showing you exactly where you were. So what if a case has a critical issue that's doubt around where was somebody when? What do you have to argue? That wasn't me, that was my phone. I was disconnected from it. Somebody else had it. Somebody else borrowed it. Would any of you believe that? Exactly. Because we already said we go to bed and look at our phones, wake up and look at our phones. It would be most disruptive to not have our phones with us. So these kind of things are available. And again, more and more this is getting pushed out to the web where as people are interacting with apps and they're checking in and doing these things, this kind of data is available through publicly accessible sites. So you have this kind of stuff that's out there, and if you're a Gmail or an Android user, you're not safe. It's just saving it in a different place, and it actually creates a nice little map for you that looks like family circus is what I describe it. Where was Billy running, looking through the yard? So you have all this information that's, again, fairly accessible and is becoming more so over time. So we have a few more minutes here, and I wanted to talk about the next topic, which is something called the Internet of Things. So has anybody heard of the Internet of Things? It's actually starting to get more notice over the last year or two. And anybody have any ideas of what this concept is? No? Okay. So the Internet of Things is basically the recognition that stuff we're buying is now hooking up to the internet. Some stupidly so, some valuable so. Like do you remember, it wasn't too long ago, there was some commercials on with, what's that celebrity couple, Kristen Bell and Dax Burrow, and they were saying, what do we need at the grocery store? Well, let me just log in and look in my refrigerator, right? That's Internet of Things. It's a device that's connected to the internet that now lets you access it or do something with it with the internet, telling you sending you a text that you need new filters on your refrigerator. And what this idea is that some of the statistics coming out are that in the next 7 years, a regular phone could contain more than 500 smart devices. And this becomes something that's very critical, because the more that we're connecting our devices, we're creating more data points. And again, the same idea that it's not about what we're saying necessarily or what we're doing, but it's what is the device recording, and it's kind of a dumb terminal, and it's just creating data points which don't have any skin in the game, and that can start to become very important information potentially. So what are some examples? Fitness apps. I'm disabled. I can't work. I have limited mobility, but I'm wearing a Fitbit. And even on your iPhone, there's a fitness app that's, if you've set it up, it's tracking how many steps you've taken, how many flights you've done, how many miles you've walked. This could become pretty important information who's somebody who's claiming, again, they have mobility issues. Home apps, now turning on and off the lights and setting the heaters and all these different things. Again, internet-connected devices. At what points do you have to be home to do that? At what points can you do it remotely? Is it telling you some interactivity of somebody with their home, and could that information be valuable? Television apps. Samsung recently, I don't know if you remember this, was a big beef because their televisions were not only sending your watching habits back out, they were selling people's watching habits, like what Netflix shows you were binging on and stuff like that, so advertisers could understand profiles of people in the area. But in some instances, the camera was being turned on these phones and were recording people without them knowing it. And it wasn't a camera, it was a recording, catching voice recordings, because they had these, the phones and turn Game of Thrones on. And they were saying they were using it for, to improve the experience, but they were selling this data out that was capturing people's conversations and things in the room. Car apps, you could find how people's driving habits, I always loved the Allstate one years ago where it's like, put this perfect driving app in and we'll lower your rates. I was thinking, who's going to do that? Because I don't want anybody to see how I'm driving. I don't think they're doing that anymore. But the cars themselves are starting to really capture this information and do this. And so you start to see a lot of these pieces. And again, GPS-enabled navigation systems in cars and different elements like that. They're really, and this is kind of a scary thing, because I know there's a topic of it, but it starts to become how hackable are these devices once they're internet enabled like this. The Amazon Echo. Did anybody get some of these for Christmas last year? This was a big sale. So great devices. Again, very interesting. But one of the elements with these Amazon Echo and the Google Voice, I think, is the other one that is out there. So you say, Alexa, or whatever you've named your device, tell me what the weather's going to be like today. Well, here the weather is going to be. So how does Alexa know that you're asking it to do something?
She's listening.
Always listening. It's always recording. And it's not smart like us where it's a self-contained device where it is listening and smart enough to recognize a command. What it's doing is it's recording, sending those recordings real time back to Amazon servers who are processing the data to say, oh, that's a command, turn on. Now let me listen to get what information you're asking for to send back to Amazon servers to capture it, to send back the appropriate information. So it's a dummy device. It's really Amazon servers in the background that are doing all the hard processing. So the way that this thing works is just simply a recording device. And this has really started to come out because it wasn't too long ago that there was a murder investigation. What the police wanted was they subpoenaed Amazon to have their recordings pulled off the server, provided in that case to see what was the background that was going on in the half hour before this murder occurred in the house, and they got them. And Amazon again says, well, we only keep this stuff to improve the performance, but again, the data is valuable, and so that's what these people are really looking for, and that's what they want to do. So these kind of things are going to drive open more and more areas. Another real quick one, the giveaway pacemaker. There was a guy who ended up getting found guilty of arson. So what he did was, this was a guy who decided to torch his house, and in the moments after he set the fire, he magically had appeared out on his front lawn with all his beloved pets and a suitcase of his most prized possessions. So what he claimed happened was, fire started, I realized I couldn't control it, I got all the kids out of the house, got all the pets out of the house, I ran upstairs, I packed this suitcase, I threw it out the upper window, ran down, and by that time the fire's blazing, fire department got here. Well, the guy also had a pacemaker, and the pacemaker was constantly sending the data points back to his healthcare provider about his heart rhythms, rates, arrhythmia, all these things because he was under the care. This is real-time monitoring of his heart. They showed that in this time period, his heart rate never went above like 70 to show that he couldn't have been moving in any way, shape, or form like he described. And this was evidence that the police got that helped convict him of arson. So again, you get into all these things that you can broaden out what potentially are other areas to work on that really have a lot of interesting implications. And this Internet of Things is just going to be a wide open area for keep an eye on us in the future. And again, as more of this stuff is web enabled and is online, it's going to become fairly accessible for an investigator looking for these things. So I think we are pretty much on the end of our time. Bill and I had put just a couple slides together here at the end, but we'll stop here, and if anybody has questions, we're going to be around. And yes, sir. You.
What about going back to the phone GPS concept? What about the concept of turning it off? We had a prosecutor in our office for some internal training, and he had prosecuted a case, and one of his pieces of evidence was the defendant always had his GPS on, and during the critical time period of traveling from A to B to commit this murder, conveniently enough, the GPS was turned off, and then at every other time it was turned back on. So he had used the opposite of that.
Yeah.
Of, the criminals are sophisticated enough to know what the phones are doing, and now they're selectively turning it off and turning it off and on, but used the pattern as a piece of evidence in this case.
Yeah, I mean, I think habit is one of the things you can impeach a witness on, right? So is that a form of habit that's significant enough that you could talk to them about? I would say, yeah. So again, the sky's the limit. You got it, but I think that the main takeaway, if anything, from today is don't think outside the box a little bit about how we've traditionally looked at forensics and social media things and stuff. Look at the negatives, or look at what people are doing on websites that are tracking stuff that they have no idea. That's going to tend to become the more fruitful information that's fairly indisputable because they had no part in creating it. So it'd be very valuable. Any other questions before we stop? Yes, ma'am.
On these devices that are tracking your locations, you know how they say once it's out there, it's out there.
Right.
If you delete that stuff on your GPS or your phone, is it really gone? Or is it still discoverable somewhere?
It all depends. Like, you can delete, for instance, something on your phone, but maybe it's in a backup that's in iCloud or a backup on a computer, or if you've you've said, hey, you're checking in somewhere, it's now on another website, or it's somebody else has it. So the long and short of it is, if it's on your phone and you're not sending that data out for a reason, then yeah, you could probably delete it, and it may be very hard to find it somewhere else. But it's just, we're so interactive with our phones and with other people out there that I think as time goes on, it's going to be less and less likely. Great. Well, we'll take our break. I think 10 minutes. Is that right, Hugh?
Thank you, guys.
Yep.